But what I think the electorate want is they want clear direction, clear policies. They need to understand what Labour actually stands for. I don't think they're there yet.
Well, Labour's put out a lot of policy over the last few months, particularly since the May elections. They've really stepped up the policies that they're putting out. We've had a lot of things on green measures. We've had things on motoring. We've had things on housing. We've had lots of policy from the Labour Party, both on things that they will do and on things that they won't do. And obviously, we're now heading into Conservative Party conference. We've then got Labour conference after that. I would imagine over those 4 or 5 days of Labour conference, Labour will set out a huge amount of policies so that the country know exactly what they're voting for when we get to the election next year.
Well, let me ask you about HS2. I was talking to Simon Calder. The Labour Party seems to be flip-flopping on this. What is the Labour Party going to do? Are they going to complete the whole thing? Are they only going to Birmingham? Are they going to build Euston? What are they doing? Are they scrapping it?
Well, I mean, you'll remember this was a Labour Party idea back in the first place, and it was going to cost, I think, 33 billion when Labour left power in 2010. It's now up to about 100 billion because of Conservative mismanagement. This week, Rishi Sunak will not answer a straight question. He's been asked a number of times, are you going to build the link between Birmingham and Manchester? And he's just refused to answer the question and making himself look like...
I'm not asking about that. What is the Labour Party doing?
I realise you're not, but I'm just putting it in context.
Well, we've spoken about that. We've spoken to the Conservatives. We've spoken to Charlie about what the Conservative Party should do. He thinks they need to build the whole thing. What does Labour want to do?
The Labour Party very clearly said that they are in favour of building the whole of HS2, but they need to look at the details. They need to look at the numbers and make sure that it's value for the taxpayer. They don't have access to that data yet, so they will make a full decision either when they get that data or once they get into power.
OK, let's talk about the front page of the Telegraph. Families already are facing the biggest tax rise or the tax burden since records began. We're now at a 70-year high, the highest since the end of the Second World War, where we had to rebuild this country. The figure is set to rise from 33% of GDP to 37% by next year. It's the biggest leap since Parliament started compiling these records. Families and businesses will be paying more than 100 billion extra in tax by next year compared with the last election. So if Labour gets in, is Labour going to cut tax?
I don't think Labour's set out whether it would cut tax, but I think it has certainly set out that it wouldn't raise tax any further. My question would be, if the government's raising an extra 100 billion a year than it was in 2019, where on earth is that money going?
On debt.
Let's get better. Well, I mean, we haven't seen the NHS get better. We haven't seen transport
They're
get better.
servicing the debt, so they keep borrowing money, and the more money you borrow, you have to service the debt because interest rates are high.
I mean, it's staggering economic mismanagement. When Labour was last in power, we had 60 consecutive quarters of growth. And you didn't particularly see the tax burden get up. What on earth this government is doing is to mismanage the economy and to mismanage the public finances.
Well, they will also say they protected people's jobs during COVID, in the pandemic. They had bounce-back loans. They actually furloughed people. They've also had a war in Ukraine. They've had the rise in oil prices.
Most of the tax increase has got nothing to do with the pandemic. Most of it is to service the NHS, actually, because we've got an ageing population. But they're not fixing that problem. They're not bringing enough people of working age. They're throwing out the money of the door of the NHS on temporary workers rather than employing them.
Well, so OK, let's go back to the Labour Party, because someone's just messaged me saying you're not actually telling us anything. Let's go back to the NHS. What is the Labour Party going to do with the NHS? We spend a lot of money. You know that I feel this. We spend a lot of money on the NHS, and yet we are failing people. Our cancer survival rates in this country are, quite frankly, appalling. Things need to change, and dramatically. And if Labour gets in, will Labour make those changes?
Of course they will. I mean, if you look at the last 30-odd years, waiting lists went up staggeringly under Thatcher and Major, dropped precipitously almost to near zero under Blair and Brown, and have now rocketed...
But also, Blair and Brown then lumbered us with PFI. They borrowed money for hospitals. We're still paying that back. It was a terrible use of public money.
You know what? They increased investments in the NHS by about 6% a year between 1997 and 2010. That dropped to zero in 2010, up to 2019. Under Johnson and Sunak, that's gone up to about 2% a year. That is why the NHS is in crisis, because they just haven't been investing in it for 30 years.
That is complete nonsense. That is complete nonsense. We have never put so much money in. If you talk to any clinician, any of my colleagues who
What I'm saying is, The increase wasn't there for about a decade. That is why we're in the crisis we're in now, both in terms of staffing and in terms of infrastructure as well.
Let's move on. Let's move on and talk about inheritance tax, because although it affects a relatively small number of people, for those people it is really important. It's about principle. You've already paid tax on your hard earnings. We want to incentivise people. Inheritance tax is, again, this tax that the Conservative Party are dancing around, and whether they may or may not actually abolish it. There is an article, again, in the Telegraph saying Labour is planning a devastating multi-billion-pound inheritance tax raid affecting farmers and family businesses by scrapping 2 exemptions, agricultural and business property relief. These are the farms. These provide food for people in this country. What the Labour Party is proposing is that actually they would start taxing them, so you cannot then carry those down the family and continue farming.
Look, I work with farmers, and I'm running an event at a Labour Party conference, in fact, with the farming community, with agriculture, with a group called Save British Farming. They are absolutely aghast at the actions of this government against farming. Primarily, it's substandard Brexit deal, but not only the substandard Brexit deal. They're genuinely fearful for the future of farming in the UK. They're not complaining about tax exemptions or inheritance tax. They're staggered because they simply cannot do their jobs. The Brexit deal, combined with the Australia trade deal, combined with the New Zealand trade deal...
But we're going over old ground. Hang on a minute, wait. We're going over old ground. We've voted for Brexit. Now we have to make Brexit work. In my opinion, we haven't Brexited. Talk to anyone in Northern Ireland. The question is, what is the Labour Party doing? I still don't understand what Labour's policies are.
I mean, in terms of inheritance tax, all they're doing is closing tax loopholes. That benefits the exchequer, that benefits the country. That means that super wealthy people can't get away with not paying inheritance tax.
What, being a farmer is super wealthy?
It's not about
what for family? Are you saying anyone with 325,000 is the individual exemption? You add another 325,000. You're saying those people are super wealthy?
No, we're talking about super wealthy people who buy agricultural land as a means of avoiding inheritance tax. That's the loophole that they're closing.
What about if you pass it down the family?
Then that's avoiding inheritance tax as well. It's the inheritance tax.
These are ongoing businesses that provide you food.
Only functioning wealth tax in our country. No, I don't know the details of this policy. I'm sure the details will be worked through so that active farms are not implicated or involved in this, and that this only falls on people who are using agricultural land to avoid paying tax.
Mike,
none of us are tax avoidance.
I'm sorry, time is short. Mike Buckley, former Labour Party advisor, thank you very much indeed for your time.